Hey, how's it going? I'm Austin Griffith, and I want to run through Clevis and Dapparatus for the Build Guild, the Beetle Geedle. We're setting up this weekly kind of podcast, hopefully weekly, but regular podcast where we kind of have this no dumb question asked environment where we can kind of just get together and talk about the ecosystem and kind of just build stuff. And so this is zero x zero of the series, the very first, or even the prequel to the videos. And I'm just going to kind of cover some basic concepts of how to set up the environment to make sure we're ready to go to hit the ground running, not just for the Build Guild, but also for my workshop in Prague, which I will shill later. But if you're at DevCon, come find me. We'll be doing a how to build meta transactions with Clevis and Dapparatus. So the first thing is basically we fire up a Clevis Docker container. Now you can use Clevis in a lot of different ways. If you check out the repo, there's like a global install. It's just an npm package. There's a global install that you could just pull down the directory and link it. Or, because some of the dependencies are a little weird on some machines, there's just a nice little Docker container that'll just set up everything for you. The cool thing about the Docker container is it's going to bring along whatever Geth or Ganache you need and also fire up your React for you. So by running this command here, but instead of my dApp directory, we're just going to do test app. So what it does is it volumes in this directory test app. And if I wanted to, I could bring up my editor and say like Atom, home directory, test app. And that's going to bring up my code editor on these files. So even though the files are kind of in the container, we can edit them here and they'll live update into the container. So it kind of just does a good job of setting up the environment for you just so you don't have to mess with stuff, and you'll have, Geth or Ganache, whatever blockchain you need to come along also. So we can just start by just doing Clevis version to make sure we've got the version, and we'll do Clevis test version, which also makes sure that not just the command line is working, but also the npm package. These should be the same, they should come together, it should work. So let's just kind of run through a basic setup. So there we go. We did our version. Our versions are all good. And this takes, so that command right there does take like 5 minutes to run. So you kind of want to get it started and go get a beer or a coffee and then come back. Okay, so once it's up and running though, once you get to this stage here, you should be able to point your browser at localhost 3000 and you kind of have a working dApp. And so if we go look at that, we can go ahead and log into MetaMask. You'll want to point your MetaMask at localhost 8545. And there we go. We're logged in. There's our account. We don't have any Ether, but it's basically like a dApp, right? Like it's connected to our Ganache node on localhost 8545. And it's ready to go. And also Clevis is hooked into the same RPC endpoint, so we can go ahead and run some Clevis commands. So if I just do Clevis accounts, like it's telling us here, it kind of lists off all the accounts. And let's just go check the balance of one of those. Of that account, it should tell us, yeah, so it has 100 Ether in it. And that's just what Ganache CLI sets up for you. If you're wondering like any of the commands, you can just do a Clevis help and it's just going to list everything and kind of what parameters need to go into that to make that work. Okay, so let's keep scrolling here. Okay, so the first thing it has you do is just transfer some Ether to this account. So if I go grab this dude's address and let's see, it'd be a Clevis send to. So if we look up in the help, there's a send and there's a send to and there's a send data, but send to is what we want. So we'll do send to. And so the difference between send and send to is send would be sending just to accounts that are within your RPC. So you can just say like account 0 to account 1. But in this case, we want to use the address. So let's see, what are we sending? We're sending 0.1 from account 0. So that would be to load it up, the account with 100 Geth or ETH. And we're going to send it to this address. And if we go watch over here, we should see that go to 0.1. Let's just run it again. So we're watching that balance right there. It goes from 0.1 to 0.2. Okay, so we're basically sending ETH to that account. And this will work on any Geth net. It doesn't have to be just Ganache. Okay, good. It's Clevis help. We're good to go. Okay, what about converting way? Like if you see a balance, so let's do Clevis accounts again, and let's get this dude's balance again. Now we can see kind of this weird number, right? And it'll tell us what it is there. But what if we want to do Clevis from way? Because there's no decimals, right? In ETH, it's all integers. So if we do Clevis from way, this giant integer, it's going to tell us, oh, what did I do wrong? Oh, I need to tell it that I need to go to Ether instead of like a SASBO or whatever other denominations. There we go. So we could tell that big number is actually 99.7 ETH because we went from way to ETH. And, it works the other way around. If you want to do Clevis two-way and you've got 0.001 Ether, it's like how much way is that? So a lot of times when you put something into a smart contract, it needs to be in way. So there it would be. We could copy and paste that. Okay, so now let's go down to what about hex? So we can go from text to hex and back, right? So there's just all these utilities that are part of the Web3 library that we kind of pack into Clevis, not just to run it from the command line, but also run it from test. And this is part 0. We'll get into all that stuff in a little bit. So let's say if you wanted to do Clevis 2 hex of hello world, it's just going to give you the hex version of that. And if you want to come back from the hex version, you can do that too. There's hello world. Okay, so also you can hash something. So Clevis, if you want the SHA-3 of that, there's the SHA-3 of hello world. Okay, so that's basically Clevis. It's kind of a command line tool that then you can copy and paste the command line stuff into Mocha tests and kind of orchestrate a lot of the deploying of your contracts. But Clevis does compile, deploy, and test your contracts, and then it kind of injects those contracts into Dapparatus, which is the next thing we'll look at here. And that is kind of like a Web3 component library for React. Everything I kept using over and over again. Like I've done a few hackathons, and in those hackathons, we seem to use the same components over and over again, right? You always bring in MetaMask, you always bring in like a contract loader. So that's what Dapparatus is. We just built those components into a nice little library you can drop in with npm install. So we go look at the Dapparatus tools, common tools. Okay, MetaMask. So there's the code for MetaMask. It's going to give you that piece, that thing in the top right. This guy. That's what comes in when you bring in the MetaMask. And again, like Dapparatus is just an npm library. You can go look at the code in the repo. It'll be linked in this write-up. So that's what MetaMask looks like. It'll call back when it updates. So it's going to update anytime a block changes or your account balance changes. So you can kind of hook into that and trigger off those events. And if you go, follow the console, you can see all this stuff here too, right? You can see what the status is. You can see what your Etherscan link or account or what block number you're on. So then the next component is gas. Like we're going to need to hit an API and find out what the current gas prices are, right? We don't want to overspend on gas, but we also want to be pretty efficient and spend just the right amount, right? Overspend, underspend. You need your transaction to go through pretty quickly, but you don't want to overspend on it. And this will just reach out to the Ether gas station. I think I just highlighted that. Cool. It'll reach out to the Ether gas station API and figure out what the best price is. Okay, and yeah, again, you could just follow your console and see it come in. Transactions are this little bar. Oh, it's not shown in there. It's the little bar in the bottom right, and it'll show like blocks as they load. So that's block 6, block 7, block 8. Here's how to bring it in, and it also will display your transactions. So it'll show kind of like a little loader bar that shows like as your transactions go through. Again, just another component that I needed to have. I used it every time, and it brings in this nice little transaction function. So instead of doing like your contracts method or contracts, your contract method function, and then the gas limit and all the other stuff that you need to put in there, this kind of abstracts that away, and you just kind of put in what you need to call, and then it'll call back when it finishes. And what's cool about wrapping that is then we can use that for things like meta transactions later on, where it can auto detect whether this transaction is a normal transaction or a meta transaction and kind of handle it the same. So the developer just needs to call this transaction function, and Dapparatus will take care of the rest, and also kind of display it down here where you can link over to Etherscan and look at it. Then onto the contract loader. So this you can just like copy and paste right in. You don't need to change any of the variables. It's just going to go to whatever your contract path is that Clevis injects. So when you do I think it's a Clevis test publish or something like that, it's going to compile all your contracts and push them into it's not going to work right now because I don't have any, but it's going to push them into the React app. So this just kind of wires Clevis into Dapparatus. So then your web app will load up, and you'll have your contracts ready to go, ready to talk to, ready to pass to the transaction object. Another one is events. It's kind of a pain in the butt to parse through all the events that happen on the chain. So you can just throw this events component in and tell it what contract you're following, what event you're looking for, and then you can even index it or filter it, and then it'll bring in, whenever it finds one of those events or one of those new events happens, it'll trigger this. And so it just helps you to keep your state up to date. And if you do config hide false, this is a good way to debug what's going on. You'll see this piece right here. It'll just like kind of list off the events kind of in the front end so you can see it. Usually you hide that away and then you parse through your state and display them in a nice way, but this is a good way to kind of troubleshoot what's going on. Here's what your events look like when they come through in the console. An address, like I found myself displaying addresses all the time, and sometimes I wanted the little identicon with it, sometimes I wanted the ETH balance, so I just added that in as a component. You can optionally hide some of those things. You can just show the blocky if you want, like it's up to you on what you want to show, but since I displayed Ethereum addresses so often, I thought I might as well just make a component for it. Buttons, like you always have a button that you need to click, right? So I just kind of try to match the style of MetaMask and have those buttons in there every time. I think there's just like an on-click button. In this example, I'm kind of passing in a transaction from some contract to the on-click. The block E is just an identicon. It's the same thing. It is an identicon, right? It's a way to make sure you didn't like fat finger. Like, so if I'm sending you something and you type in my address, I don't know why you do that, but maybe copy and paste. You just need to make sure that you copy and pasted it correctly. Again, it's like something that I'm always displaying this little blocky or the little identicon, so I just made it into an object. Bonus points, this is the Boba Fett blocky that I mined. You can click into there and see the blocky miner. And then finally, the last thing is like the scaler. I think that some hardcore Web 2.0 people will judge me for this, but it's just a thing that kind of shrinks things to make it more mobile responsive. I think mobile responsiveness is more about like being able to click the right buttons and do that kind of stuff. But as you can see in this GIF, it's sort of like shrinking the title. So then if you open it up on your phone, you should be able to see everything and all the content should fit. And what you can do is just wrap it in this scaler and say like, it's supposed to be 1,000. So if it's 300, shrink the 1,000 down to 300. So that's basically it. Those are, that's Clevis and Dapparatus. That's the intro. That's kind of like the high level you need to get started with the build guild stuff. So that's basically episode 0. We'll do episode 1 next, where we start kind of using these tools to actually build something. If you're interested in building with this stuff, hit me up at DevCon. It is this next week. I will be presenting on October 31st at 3:30 p.m. at the Kokolo room. So come find me, check out Dapparatus and Clevis, and come join the Build Guild. Follow me on the Beetle Geedle. Follow me on Twitter, and let's build some stuff.